Hello, everyone. You're listening to episode 87 of the Health Can't Wait podcast. I'm Maggie Landis, your host here, and I have another guest episode today. I know I am just piling guest on top of guest on top of guest, but they're so good. I just do these recordings and I want to release them because it's that relevant. And this week's is going to be hyper relevant, seeing as it's almost Thanksgiving and the holiday time when perhaps you're getting together with your extended family or your parents or siblings that you maybe don't see all the time. We're talking about generational diet trauma today. And what I mean by that is your belief system about your body and about food and dieting is, came from a lot of different places, but one of the major forces that shapes that belief system is your family of origin. And specifically, if you are a woman, that tends to be the female role models in your life, whether that's a mom, a stepmom, a grandmother, an aunt. We adopt a lot of their belief system and behavior around food and dieting and body image, and that's not always a good thing. We have a lot of damage done over the years from things that were perhaps best intended at the outset, but knowing what we know now, it really, got us into a cycle of self-loathing and weight cycling and constant distraction with food and trying the new diet and trying to, really please these women that laid expectations out that were culturally normative, but really not beneficial to us. So we're having this conversation today so that as an adult now, how perhaps some ideas that you can set boundaries and engage in conversations productively with people that perhaps introduced you to diet culture. There's also some tips in here for those of you that are parents and want to do differently by your own children regarding, these topics. And I couldn't think of a better guest to come on than Melissa Landry, who is a registered dietitian, and she runs a practice where she specifically works in a non-diet model and uses her experience both personally and professionally to help people unravel themselves from this generational diet trauma. She's got a super interesting story. I'm not going to spoil it, and I'm going to let her tell you, but she originally actually worked as a researcher in the weight loss industry, kind of saw the behind the scenes, ended up emerging from that and finding what she feels and what I feel is a far more productive, far more ethical model of healthcare and nutrition care. And she also is very frank, both here on the podcast and in her social media platforms, about her own struggles with her mother and their kind of joint relationship regarding food and size and weight and body image and those sorts of things. So I think this is a conversation that is very apropos given Thanksgiving is next week, and probably will feel very familiar to a lot of you listening. So I hope that you enjoy. And without further ado, let's get to the interview with Melissa Landry.
The number you have dialed has been changed.
Y'all, I'm changing, you're changing, and we are changing our cultural and clinical obsession with size right here. I'm Dr. Maggie Landis, a physician, public health nutritionist, and health at every size educator. And we're doing the hard work here, friends. This podcast is going to challenge everything you think you know about health, nutrition, diets, and weight. I invite you to come for the science and stay for the sass. We are getting this done together because health can't wait. All right. Well, thank you for joining me today, Melissa, and giving your time and your expertise to shed a little light on these issues of generational diet trauma.
You are so welcome. It's a sunny topic, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I know, right? Anything that has the word trauma in it, and especially when it involves our moms, our
Yeah.
mothers. No, I really and we're going to get to that in just a second. I would like you to share what you're comfortable about sharing about your kind of professional history, because as many health professionals, dietitians, physicians, we've talked about all this, like we didn't start in the intuitive eating space. We didn't start in a weight neutral space. Not one. I have not met one person ever who's practiced like this since the beginning. I mean, because we're just not trained to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how, because you had a like major transition. I mean, you were working in basically weight loss research institutions, and coming out of that must be like emerging from the matrix. Probably. Is that a fair
yes and no? It
description?
actually felt like freedom. It felt like validation. I think professionals sometimes have a parallel process to clients where suddenly you realize like, oh, I've been trying so hard to fix this problem and it wasn't me. I thought I was the problem. I thought I wasn't a good provider. I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't trained well enough. And it wasn't me. Like there was a real liberation breaking out of that loop and realizing a lot of the experiences I had made sense.
Right. So share how you did. You're working in this very weight-centered scientific space. What was the like nidus of like the catalyst, that kind of made you even think for a second, like maybe there's something different?
I wish I came to it faster than I did, Maggie. I wish I could tell you there was like this moment where, the hand of God touched my head and I was like, oh, I see the light. But this was actually about I want to say 8 to 10 year journey for me. I finished dietetic internship and I told myself I would never work in weight management. I was just kind of like got the ick from it from the start. But I'm young, I'm a whippersnapper, and a major hospital institution affiliated with Harvard hires me within their weight loss clinic. And I go, you know what? I'm going to get in there and I'm going to get out of the weight loss world. I wanted to work in GI. I was like, that was what's going to happen.
Okay.
I get there. I begin working in pediatric weight management, half of my time and half of my time in research. And like a lot of providers, I'm not questioning the weight loss model. I am just saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. And I'll give it a go and move on when I'm done with this work. And I start to see some discrepancies between the way that research is handled and the clinic is handled. So right then and there, I'm starting to get a little bit of that tension and confusion of like, wait, the way we deliver healthcare to in a research trial is really different than the clinic, and the outcomes were different as well. So that's where I'm starting to like peel back, and I'm not understanding why it is that when our patients don't come back for visits, we don't double click on that. I'm not understanding why we don't have outcomes inside of our clinic the way we're tracking outcomes inside the research study. So in my limited, young, youthful, can-do worldview, I was starting to question what was happening, but I was asking the wrong questions. And so my thought at the time is like, all right, well, what if we start to become better educators and we make more community-based programs? This is where a lot of people go, right? The problem is the access to the weight medicine, not the weight medicine itself. I decide to get a master's in education because I think, well, Melissa, you could become the best teacher in the world, and you'll build a program that is so good, that is
right.
So lovable.
It's not that the foundation of weight science is the problem. It's the fact that you're not teaching it well enough, right?
And LOL talking about trauma responses. This is what is called fawning. I'm just trying to like people please my way into fixing this chaos. Time goes on. The system's bucking me. The patients don't like what I'm doing. I feel like crap. I decide I don't even want to be a dietitian anymore. I'm like, this is not for me. So I took a little detour into the tech world. So I started working in more broad health coaching. And ultimately that stint came to an end and I went for a job, and it was in research, which is where I came from. And this is where I had a little bit more wisdom and a little bit more time and a little bit more exposure to the Hays messages, where when I saw the same thing happening, I had a different perspective. I was able to ask new questions instead of saying, because I knew I was a great teacher and counselor by that point. I'm darn near 30.
Yeah.
I knew I was a good teacher at that point. I was darn near 30. And I was like, this isn't a me problem. My supervisors are telling me what an excellent counselor I am. They were using me as the role model to the other dietitians. And still we're seeing these issues. So that's when it really started to become clear to me that the gold standard, the very best that providers have to offer, isn't actually producing the outcome of weight loss. And when I looked at those clients, they looked a lot like my mom. My patients were saying the things my mom said grew up. They were struggling with emotional eating and binging, on again, off again relationships to their self-care, not just the dieting, right? When I'm on the diet, I'm taking good care of myself. And when I'm off, I don't matter. I'm going to go hide. And suddenly I started to make meaning of all of these experiences when I was growing up, watching my mom, who is in a larger body, she always has been, go through these phases in her life and the disconnection that caused in our own personal relationship. Messages that she put on me being I was a straight size or a thin kid, and how proud she was of that and what that did for my self-esteem and my identity and connection to self-worth. So slowly I'm finally in this place, 10 years trying to figure out what's wrong with me. I'm starting to see that maybe there's something wrong with the culture or the intervention. And that's when everything unlocked for me. So not a very neat answer, but this progression over time was really powerful for me. And since then, I have loved labeling generational diet trauma for people and helping people to make meaning of it and overcome that, because it's possible to live life after growing up in diet culture.
Well, right. And I know this episode is not about me, but we've talked about this whole thing about health professionals and physicians. Is my, area of expertise. Like people that are in their mid-career now grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, like heyday diet culture. I mean, like I would argue more so even than now. And that's who's the one delivering the care. And so you cannot completely untangle your personal experience and your lived experience from your professional training. Even, I mean, nobody can. We're humans.
Yeah. I always had this confusion where people would sort of, when the interventions failed, and specifically, I mean, the programs offered me, and how do they fail? People don't come back. People don't lose weight. People report difficulty sticking with whatever we're prescribing. When that would happen, providers would kind of look at that outcome and go, well, they're just not motivated. They're just not trying hard enough. And that never, I will give myself credit there. I would always push back on providers and say, well, nobody in this society, the way that folks are treated, these kids are coming into clinic, leaving school. They don't want to be here. If they could, they would. Like if there is no one more motivated to do this than someone who's suffering the consequences of weight stigma. So I remember seeing my mom, how badly she wanted that her whole life. She was an otherwise motivated person in so many areas in her life. We hear this from clients, like, I have my life together in so many areas. Why not this? Because this isn't a problem. Your body was not a problem to be fixed. It's just that you were told that. So there was that early inkling in the beginning to kind of question, like, my clients really care about this, and they have executive function. They're doing well at work. They're smart. They're thoughtful.
Right.
Huh? How is it that this is the thing that they can't execute on? It's not that complicated.
Right.
You can easily dictate the advice of eat less, move more. Why are they having such trouble? And I didn't have the Hayes language in the beginning to think that way. But once I did, that was an answer that really made sense for me. It seems
almost too, when you think about it, it almost seems too simple that you're like, it's possible that that's not even the right advice. Like, could it be so simple that that's actually the wrong advice? And like we especially as scientists and clinicians, like have to make everything like 10 layers deep and super complicated. But actually the reason that your mom and everybody else doesn't have, quote, willpower or motivation to do this is because it's actually not about that at all. It has nothing to do with how hard she tries or how smart she is or whatever. So let's when you say, I want to back up a few steps here. So you and I know what we're talking about when we say generational diet trauma, or I don't know what language you prefer to use. What do you mean when you're talking about that to your audience?
To me, generational diet trauma means the way that families pass on messages, attitudes, and beliefs that cause trauma around our relationship to food and body. Now, families aren't doing this in a vacuum in and of themselves. It's another thing that really interests me. You might think about your own family of origin. Think about the generations you met and maybe your mother and your grandmother. It's kind of hard to go back beyond historical fiction from that point.
Right.
But we think about the world that they lived in, and particularly on women, how the messages and demands of how women should present. I'm from an Italian American family. My grandparents moved here in their early 20s, English as a second language. I think about their need to assimilate and fit in a country where they're brand new.
Sure.
I think about the fact they grew up in World War II and that food was sometimes scarce and they experienced war trauma. And there are all these things that filter into their relationship with food and their bodies as a way to belong in this new country that they are putting on their kids, my mom and my aunt. And they learn those things on top of that generation and the new emerging diet culture. And they put those things on me and my two sisters. And so families don't exist in a vacuum. And so I really love to help clients, one, identify what happened in the family, but then kind of get to a place where they can heal and almost observe, what are all these forces influencing me before I'm even born that make me feel the way I feel about my body or make it hard for me to really see food as neutral? That's not a you problem. That's a multifactorial historical thing that is worth understanding.
Well, and anybody only knows as much as they know. Like your perspective is reality. Anybody's individual perspective is reality. So when I'm just using your mom as an example, because you use her often as an example, but it could be my mom or anybody else's mom. It's they told us to do these certain things and behaviors and instilled these beliefs because to them, that was the best possible care. Like that was the best parenting. That was 100%. The best. Like they didn't even think there was something else. They didn't question that because this is, so we inherit. I mean, inherit's a good word, I guess. We just really inherit this whole constellation of, I like how you say behaviors, beliefs, feelings, whatever. It's part of us almost as built in almost as much as like a genetic inheritance. It's you're imprinted with it so early and it's young, right? I mean, we're talking like these are things like that's one of the things I wanted to ask you is like how soon is a parent's behavior, role modeling, recommendations, how little are these kids that were our own kids? Like I think it's young. I mean, as a pediatrician, I think it's very young that we're making.
It's immediately because it happens in a system. So we're talking about moms, and yes, moms are absolutely important gatekeepers and influencers inside families, but moms live inside a system. And so if I'm a mom with a mom who praises me in messages that, my body being smaller is good or me pursuing weight loss is good, who constantly comments on how I eat, sometimes those attitudes and behaviors, even if I change my mother and then maybe my sister, the family system is going to work to maintain the diet culture because the diet culture is a proxy for safety, for belonging, for status, maybe for health, as it is believed by the family system. So I do believe this impacts families even before a child is born. Once they come into the world, you might be asking more specifically, like what are the things that maybe parents are doing? How soon can kids detect diet culture? I would say as soon as they're testing their own autonomy to feed themselves. There is a moment when a child weans from either formula or breast milk, and it's a bit of a, like that feeling. I've never double dutched, Maggie. I told you I have weird metaphors. Here it comes. I always imagine someone like getting ready to jump in the double dutch and like, you don't know when the right time to jump in the ropes is. I almost observe early parenting and feeding like that, where you're like, I want to let them try it on their own, but can I let them, like, there's this tension as kids grow, where it's like, when do I let them be in charge and autonomous for themselves? And developmentally, that is going to change. Obviously a 2-year-old doesn't have the ability to be autonomous the way a 10 or a 16-year-old does. But it can start as early as that. Do we have the attitude that children can recognize their hunger and fullness, that they can trust the cues that they feel and the cues that they get feedback to us to say they're done or they're not done? And so I would say as soon as a kid has autonomy to feed themselves is when, even if we're not saying the words,
Right.
our attitudes can seep into our philosophy or parenting style that can then reinforce the snap of that family system, whatever existed prior to that kiddo being in the group.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of power in observation for kids. I mean, I would argue even a pre-verbal toddler age kid who's, sitting at a dinner table in a high chair with the family, and all the family's eating this food except for the mom who's got a special meal because she's on some, plan, and she's got her own little separate food because she's eating a prepackaged diet plan, or maybe she's not eating at all or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, one meal like that, two meals like that, probably a 2-year-old doesn't know the difference. But like, if over time, over and over and over, the messaging is like, the family all shares this food except for mom, she eats something different. Like, that becomes like somehow imprinted in their brain. Or, mom's always picking at her body, looking in mirrors, changing her clothes, like whatever.
Yeah.
It's not even directed at the child. It's kids get so much through observation. And it can be good or bad.
That observation is a big piece. For me growing up, one of the beliefs my mother had was that if she could protect us from becoming fat, we wouldn't go through the things she went through, which it still makes me really emotional to say that.
Yeah.
Out loud.
Yeah.
It's a really difficult thing as a grown kid and as a little kid to feel like your body is responsible for your safety and for your mom feeling like you're safe.
Right. And having some, especially now as an adult, looking at your mom with like compassion that she said these things and did these things because she loved you and your sister and wanted to protect you, even though it seems like, quote, damaging behavior, that wasn't at all the intention, and I don't think it rarely is. I think people do the best, especially moms. My word, moms will do whatever they can to take care of their kids. And sometimes they miss the mark because we have given them the wrong information.
Yeah. The impact still is harmful and the behaviors are still wrong. And that's where it's difficult as you're healing from it to make space to the degree you can provide compassion to where they come from, but also you are as important as your mom's needs. That's huge. Something sometimes we learn as growing up in any time of maybe more chronic little t trauma through childhood is to think of other people before ourselves. That can be a really conditioned response to say, well, she didn't know and she needs this and you matter too. And so part of the work I'm doing with clients is actually taking a step back. And before we go to the place of compassion for them, which I believe in, I think that's a very healing space to be, actually allowing yourself some space to identify who you are and your philosophy. I had a client say to me just yesterday, I'm so excited to make a movement plan. And it's a weird feeling for me because I don't think I've ever had the space to decide how I want to do it. It has always been met with advice from my mother or the side eye from my mother. She was always behaving around movement either to please her or to rebel and react from that. And the ability to take that step back and say, what do I care about? What do I like? Do I even care about movement? Do I want movement? Felt really liberating for her. And so that's something that I think anyone who identifies with like, oh yeah, I had some mama drama growing up around this stuff. Not trying to fix the relationship betwixt y'all first. That's not the place.
That's not the starting point. Right.
That's important and can happen alongside this, but how are you to know what boundaries to set? How are you to know where to give compassion if you yourself don't have values and philosophy and attitudes that are differentiated from that system? You can't do it. So
yeah, you need your own set of values, your own kind of agency. Well, and that's interesting that you mentioned that about exercise because I've had clients before. I spend a lot more time talking about food than I do about exercise. And I've said, okay, if you could go to the grocery store, get groceries and cook a meal in your kitchen that was like the best thing you can imagine. And it had nothing to do with the price. Nobody else has to eat it. It doesn't, it doesn't matter what the calories are. Doesn't matter what they don't even know. They don't even know what they like anymore. They don't even know what's your favorite food? They don't even have a food. Like they have not thought about food outside the context of calories and portion size and this and that for their whole adult lives. Mm-hmm. They just don't even know. And you're saying the same thing about exercise. We do have to create our own identity. You're right. Because setting up a boundary is like protecting your identity. But if you don't have anything to protect, then there's too much wiggle room there.
Very confusing.
Yeah.
You're bringing up the main impact I think happens to kids who are exposed to diet culture early on. And of course, there's going to be different degrees of severity, the temperament of the individual that's going through it. There's all these like individualized factors that occur that might make it present in one way or another. There are plenty of people who go through that and maybe don't have disordered eating because of various factors. So, but the main thing I'm seeing is this learning to self-silence, which intuitive eating is really built on a concept called interoceptive awareness, which means our body's ability to sense itself. And the whole crux of intuitive eating actually isn't to eat or move in a certain way. It's to build connection with yourself so that you become someone who can use those cues and data to make choices for yourself through your life. It's a self-care model. And if you exist in a family of diet culture, that's often not put on the forefront. Self-silencing is actually the language of success. My mom said, you can have dessert after dinner. I need to silence that need, and I have to eat this thing that is not pleasing to me in order to get that. My mom, we were a big clean your plate club family. My mom said, I have to clean my plate. I'm going to self-silence my fullness to finish that plate. My mom said, I can't. So there's so many things we are trained every step of the way, you eat 3 to 5 times a day. Lots and lots of practice self-silencing those cues. That's the real harm that's being done, is we lose that ability to do what our bodies naturally can do. And that's what you can practice and build back again.
Yeah. The body works. The way that I always phrase it, the body works despite
For the most part, yes.
And it is, whether you believe in divine creation or you just believe in really good engineering, like the body is a group of biologic systems that have to work, or we would be extinct as a species. So it doesn't depend. Its functioning does not depend on how smart you are, how many degrees you have, what year you were born, how much money your mom has. Like, it has nothing to do with that. It's actually, if we just let it work and we quit white knuckling and micromanaging everything, it actually does better without us. And intuitive eating to me is like what it takes, makes the choices about eating and movement not an intellectual decision anymore. It makes it the interoceptive awareness, makes it an internal cueing instead of a list of, because diet culture is the ultimate intellectual exercise. Like, you add stuff up and there's points and there's calories and there's measuring cups and scales and log sheets and this and certain times on the clock. And like, turns it into a giant, like, algebraic equation.
And that can feel good. I want to acknowledge
for control people, that feels real good. That's like, the perfectionistic control part of us loves that sort of behavior.
Everything, our schooling, we love language as human beings. We read books, we listen to, if you're listening to this podcast, let me ask how many you listen to. Podcast people are podcast
people. That's right.
Yes. So language and mathematics to include as a type of language, like, these things feel really good and familiar. And again, when we're experiencing trauma, we need safety.
Yeah.
And being in your body and doing this more intuitive work does often not feel safe for people growing up. And so when you are an adult and you've gotten yourself to a place of safety, which if you did, give yourself a big hug, congratulations. That's hard inner work. That's hard.
That's a big win.
Yeah. You're now in a place where, maybe you're in relationship with your mom. Maybe you get activated a lot by different things where your body's going haywire and you have racing thoughts about your body and food. You are in a safe space now, and you have permission to be safe if you want to. And that's really where my specialization, I really want to work with people who understand what I mean. Some people won't. Some people will be like, what are you talking about? You will understand what I mean if you've been through it. I want to work with people like that because it's such a rewarding thing to realize you can trust your body and that you made it. Like you did something incredible by getting to a place of autonomy and
Yeah.
identifying who you are and what you want to do with your life. That's real exciting to me. That's why I love this work, because the food gets a little boring after a while to talk about. I want to talk about you.
Let me tell you what, the RDs that I have met that are having the most fun in their profession are talking about food very little.
Yes, yes.
You know. But okay, so let me ask you this. I know, and if you follow Melissa on Instagram, her videos and stuff are very funny and like really relatable, because I think so many people, particularly, you know, maybe in our age group, and I'm lumping us together, like have had these interactions with mothers and grandmothers and you know, weird Aunt Ruthie and all the people. They're good to like kind of recognize what has happened to us. What are the first steps? Like if somebody's watching your videos or listening to this podcast, like, oh my gosh, she is speaking like into my brain. This is how I grew up. I grew up having to do this. And now that we are autonomous and have a little more authority over our interactions, what are the first steps to navigate that relationship? Because here, okay, it's like the fall, right? And I think this podcast is going to probably publish at the beginning of November, and it's almost Thanksgiving. Mom's coming for Thanksgiving. Maybe grandma's coming. Maybe weird Aunt Ruthie's coming. And all of a sudden the conversation in the kitchen is about, oh, you've put on a little through the middle there. And we shouldn't be putting this. I made this without any butter because I heard it was, you know, like it gets this crazy making space. Like when you're back in the presence of the people that created this trauma response for you over 100%. A long period of time, like, I don't even know. I don't know what the question is exactly, but like, what's the do?
What would you say we do here?
What do we do? Yeah. Like, I mean, but shy of just saying like, I'm never eating a meal with you ever again, Mom. Like, what's the like point to maintain? Like, cutting people completely off is actually very easy. It's the continuing to maintain a relationship that is hard.
Yeah. So we talked about this idea of compassion a little while ago, Maggie, like, oh, having compassion for them. And I actually instructed us to like put that aside for a second. One thing I can tell you, when I was maybe in the throes of my own healing, I remember feeling very much like I felt unlucky that I was in a family like mine that was so harsh about certain things, or I felt really I was unfair, or I was alone, or other people didn't have to go through this, or there's often a lot of real and valid feelings of sadness and anger. And it's driven by this idea that you are in a family that is the only one as messed up as this, doing these things to each other. And if I was like that family on television, and we see Thanksgivings on TV where, you know, I'm thinking that show Modern Family, where like the conflict is adorable and they wrap it up in 30 minutes. We have all these ideas that are like, why isn't my family like the one on TV, which is grief? And one thing I would say before we even talk about how do we navigate those conversations, you know, effectively, there's tactics, of course.
Sure.
Is taking a step back and providing that self-compassion to yourself. And that's what I hope the videos can do, is by depicting these phrases, and sometimes they can be really activating. I want people to reclaim those a little bit rather than like bullets that come at you. When you have seen them in my videos, or you have talked about this and say, wait a minute, there's all these people commenting this happened to them too. That narrative of I'm the only one with this family that's broken and I'm stuck here, and if only it were different, that's causing you to feel like you're not good enough and causing rage at them, has no choice but to come down a notch. And from that place, then you can use the tactics I'm about to share. So one thing I want to invite you to remember is that this is happening to, I would say, more families than not in our country. You experiencing this, you are not alone in experiencing this.
Oh, absolutely not.
It is not your fault. There is nothing you could have done or said better. And there's nothing you can do or say better that is going to change the system. The system is something you're part of.
Yeah, it's the normative of temperature of our society. The temperature is the wrong word, but it's like this is the standard interaction. This is, you know, what we were taught. This is what we're conditioned. Yeah, but I think I don't want to say misery loves company, but misery does love company. And to know that
at least feels validated. Misery feels
yeah.
validated with company.
Well, and then you have the power of like the resourcefulness of having other people that have had the same experience to support you and come
connect
up
with
with
you.
solutions.
My handle is no more guilt, but shame is the deeper, more intense cousin to guilt. This is where shame, we really got to bust the shame around this within families. You know, my mom gave me permission to tell her story. We had a really beautiful, it was a very cathartic conversation.
You know what? Side note, I think about this all the time when I watch your page. I'm like, does her mom follow this account?
Yes.
Like,
she's on board.
Her
take was that, and you know, I think she's still wrapping her head around a lot of the messages, like her own personal beliefs about health at every size and dieting, I would say are very like she's identifying what that means to her personally. But with regard to these messages, I think she does know this is no surprise that she was avoidant of certain things in my life. And she wishes that the connection between us was stronger through my teens and 20s. It's since repaired and gotten really strong. And so I think she also has that perspective of like, yeah, this did impact us and it wasn't fair what happened to me. And I want to be able to help people by naming that story. So for her, she enjoys the ability to talk about the messiness of it. I don't know, or for me to share that. But yeah, at any rate,
that's so helpful. And you're both of you. I mean, you're a professional at this, but even your mom, like, I hope she knows how her even just giving permission for you to talk about it is like transformative for like more than thousands of people that see this and identify their own experience. You know,
it is powerful.
Yeah.
It's a vulnerable thing. And, you know, of course you have fears of like, are people going to think that she's a bad mom or I'm a bad daughter? Or we have a bad family. Like those are some real fears. Like I had putting that message out, but ultimately it's like, no, because that would mean that everybody is bad and we're not all bad. It's just, we're not. And so for me, I think that's part of the power of the message is like normalizing and removing the shame. And so if you're going into a upcoming family event, remember that there are two parts of this work. One part of the work is the grief work and the shame management or shame busting that
shame resilience. I like the word shame resilience. That
shame
makes us sound more like Brene Brown when we talk.
Yes, shame resilience. So that side of the work is separate from boundary setting. And what I see a lot of people do is coming into family events that are already activated and already hot to trot and trying to do both at the same.
Yes.
And this is where you're going to poke the bear. This is where you're going to dilute your message. This is where, because it may be a foreign behavior to the system loves to come back to itself. So it's going to snap back with equal and opposite force. And so if you have an upcoming event and you're feeling like you might get activated in some kind of way, first, we're going to do that compassion. And we're going to decide going into that event, what is some of the emotional coping I need to do before, during, and after this event, knowing that whatever I say and do, even if it's the most perfect, lovely speech of all time, it's not going to change it. It won't. So that's step one, is to figure out your emotional coping through that. Intuitive eating actually gives us skills for this. So I know you're like, who's this registered dietitian when you're talking about emotional coping? We don't have to take this. And some people are like, do I have to go deep dive and pluck at my childhood trauma wounds? If you want to, but you don't have to. We can label the emotions that are kind of going to come up. Shame, fear, guilt, sadness, frustration. Bet you can name a few more, disappointment. Yeah. Intuitive eating gives us a skill set that we label these emotions as body cues and we come up with garden variety coping to deal with it. So this doesn't have to be a deep dig.
I look at it as like a rehearsal. It's almost like a rehearsal. That's what you're doing is like to reduce the shock value or the surprise or the kind of reflex reaction, because you've already kind of gone through in your head how this is very likely to unfold.
Yeah. So that's one aspect of the work. And if that's all you do, oh baby, that's amazing. Like,
yeah, that's a lot.
You just interacted differently inside the system, which is like, heck yeah, like this is like, you know, a secret mission kind of deal. You know, you just performed as a double agent. Good girl. Like that's it. So that is one thing you can do. And if that's all you can do, please give yourself credit for that. That's beautiful, wonderful work. You're taking care of yourself through a tough environment. Now, the second piece is the boundaries. Boundaries to me means communicating through action or word that someone else's behaviors are not working for you. That's what a boundary is. A boundary does not mean that the person complies, and it does not refer to enforcement means, which means what do I do when the boundaries get crossed? So that's another thing I see fall apart for people is they think through the thing that's not okay, right? They think through how they might communicate it. I'll walk out, I'll say something, I'll change the subject, but they don't think through what will I do if the person doesn't respect it, and when am I willing to enforce? Am I going to be flexible if they don't respect it? Or am I going to be rigid? And there's no right or wrong answer to that. That is the practice of boundaries. Boundaries are a practice. They are not something you do. You put the ring of salt around your body and you say, if anyone crosses, I'm gonna explode.
If only it were that easy, right?
It's not that easy. And so that's where, again, I really encourage people to think about what their grief and shame resilience work would look like and what their boundary work would look like if they themselves were less activated and more confident and clear on what they're doing. Those things are inherently going to get easier. So in my work, I do help people with these techniques and strategies, but mostly we're saying, how do we do that just enough so you can have enough space to answer who you are, how you like to eat, what your skills are? Because this work, everyone's trying to jumble this work into one smoothie. It's a lot of different moving parts. And it serves you to do one thing well at a time.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, that is a great place to land. The work you're doing, I just can't thank you enough because it influences so many of women I know specifically, and women that are now raising their own kids, that are now, working professionals, working with other younger people, and breaking the cycle. It has to happen somewhere. And it doesn't happen instantaneously. It doesn't, obviously there's so much to this, but I really like the way that you talk about this family system having its own identity. It's like its own force that takes it out of our hands a little bit. It kind of absolves us of some of that guilt, I think, because this whole system is set up to work a certain way. And like you said, my body's not the problem. My intelligence isn't the problem. My parenting isn't the problem. My whatever. You can start to address it when you don't have to hold the whole thing at one time.
Yeah. You can focus one thing at a time.
That's generally good life advice I've come to find out. It's only taken 46 years to get here, but whatever. It is what it is. So, okay, we're going to do one quick little thing here. And then, I want you to share where everybody can find you, because obviously you do great work and have lots of, wisdom and fun to, let people tap into. But I do this little thing called Truth or Trash here on the podcast. And basically this is not a whole other deep dive podcast. This is like a sort of short form answer, but, this is a good one for you. I picked this one for you. So, weight loss programs that are targeted towards teenagers. All right. It's happened forever in industry, but I see it a lot in clinical medicine and pediatricians' offices and children's hospitals and stuff. And what are we doing harm, doing good, doing both, doing neither? What's your take on weight loss programs for teenagers?
I'm gonna give it a trash and a certified trash label.
Certified trash.
Having worked inside programs like this and thinking about how that's going to parlay with a generational diet trauma dynamic, they are co-signing with big authority and with the power of our natural desire to raise healthy, competent, wonderful children. They are co-signing diet culture messages that are absolutely doing harm. So that's a thumbs down from me, Maggie.
Thumbs down. Yeah, I think a thumbs down. We spoke before we started recording. I remember, and this is 20 plus years ago when I was in training, the children's hospital I was at had some sort of program, and I can't remember the name of it for the life of me. It had the word shape in it. It was either shape up or shape down or something. which, seemed all cute and kitsch at the time, but it was basically a way to segregate and pull out, overweight, air quote, overweight teenagers that already certainly have experienced more weight stigma and personal trauma, bullying, whatever, and then put them in this weird clinical environment where it's like framed as like supportive and
everyone's helping you. There's a lot of saviorism inside these clinics where providers are like, I helped them lose weight. It's a very icky.
Yeah. And I don't think we measure the harm. Like that we do, in these kind of clinical environments, like we like to really hang our hat on like the quote successes, and we talk about and we publish and we present like all these kids that lost 10% of their body weight or whatever, which is usually a very small fraction of the group. And then
the time they're growing,
like, have we measured the eating disorder behavior? Have we measured?
Yes, that is a really good point. You are more likely to get an eating disorder through that age range than type 2 diabetes. And we don't
absolutely
act accordingly on that.
And like, have we followed up with the 15-year-old that was in this Shape Up program? Like when they're 40 years old, like what's their relationship in with food and body? And I thought you were going to say flaming hot trash, so I thought I'd put it to you, but it's kind of crazy making though, because you see these programs and the amount of just resources being poured into them to know that they're doing mostly, with a little asterisk, harm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely there.
Yikes. Okay, so if everybody wants to find Melissa, where would they find all of your content and your programming and that sort of thing?
Yes. So my handle on Instagram is no.more.guilt. I make these videos Maggie is referring to fairly regularly. I'm also up in stories, just hanging out with my dog Lucy and my husband Dave in Boston. So I'd love for you to come learn with me. And when you get there, you can find a free guide on my website called 3-Step Guide to Eat Without Guilt. It gives a little more background on my generational trauma story and some ways for you to structure your intuitive eating work. I see a lot of free guides telling you the principles of IE, but not how to organize them into action. And so that's what my guide will offer you. I'd love for you to get those resources and come hang out with me.
Oh, good. Yeah. And people, you need to download this like quick, because we're getting towards the end of the year. And if you thought the messaging about weight loss and diet culture was bad in the summer, it is like everybody knows that everything doubles down at the end of the year. And particularly with the resources you have for helping these interactions with families. Everybody's getting ready to get in the kitchen with Weird Aunt Ruthie. So let's get ourselves prepared.
Let's get there. And also, too, I should mention, I have a podcast as well called Break the Diet Cycle. So like we said, podcast people are podcast people.
Yes.
So,
podcast begets podcast.
Yes. So if you are interested, there's a bunch of different titles on there. Sometimes you just like to listen to one episode for a topic that you really needed. So I'd invite you guys to look at the catalog there if you'd like.
Fabulous. And I will put all those resources in the show notes so people can just click and find you. And thank you again for sharing your story and your expertise with us today.
Thanks, Maggie. You're the best. I'll see you around.
I'm so grateful you joined me today. If you're liking the science and the vibe here, I hope you'll tell a friend or two about this podcast. You can also follow me on social media at Maggie Landis MD, or check out everything that I offer and everything I do at my website, maggielandismd.com. The solution is us, my friend, because health can't wait.